Serious, Redditors who have lawfully killed someone, what's your story? My middle daughter's nutcase ex-boyfriend smashed the glass out of our dining room slider while we were eating supper. He burst in wielding a single bit axe. My kids fled while I attempted to reason with him. Then I fled. Once I realized there was no reasoning with him, he followed me. I tossed a cushion from the living room sofa at him, then retreated to my bedroom. He followed me and broke down the door. I blew him apart with my little coach gun. Both barrels. The powers that be charged it off as justifiable homicide. My girls and I spent 6 weeks in a cheap motel until we found a different house to rent. Generally the doctor writes the order to titrate morphine for air hunger, discontinues any medication and writes for comfort measures only. Then I just keep giving morphine until they don't crave air anymore. I guess this isn't what was asked, but nurses have to kill people all the time. Some I feel good about, some feel freaking horrible. 22-year with cancer, 48-year-old with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Some just stay with you for the rest of your life. I remember one man in particular who said he just wanted to die at home. When he said this I almost started crying in front of him because I knew he was so much oxygen that he would have died just trying to get him to an ambulance to go home. I kept him alive until his last son made it to the hospital. Best I could do. We shook each other's hand, said it was an honor and a privilege to know each other. He said his goodbyes to his family. I removed his oxygen and turned up the morphine. I don't normally cry, and if I do I don't do it in front of the patient or their family. Then we only have a couple minutes to be heartbroken, because we have to get back to work. I used to work as a corrections officer at a county jail. About 2 years ago one of our diabetic inmates had a blood sugar of about 400 plus, so I was the one who transported him to the ER. So we're just sitting there talking in the hospital and I hear screaming and crashes in the room next to ours. I go to the door and there are probably 15 nurses standing outside the door of the next room overlooking in. I ask them what's going on and they say there is a man here fighting security staff. I ask them if they need help and someone says yes, so I instruct one of them to stay with my inmate and I enter the room. There is a huge man there, maybe 350 pounds, thrashing and screaming, and he is fighting 4 security guards on the ground who are trying to restrain him. I jump in, basically take a full mount on his hips, pinning his back to the floor and put him in a front-facing headlock with a security guard on each limb. At this point he had defecated all over himself and there was quite a bit of blood. Anyway, I'm looking in his face and his eyes are completely wild, when they just roll back in his head and he goes completely limp. We restrain him and lift him onto the table so the nurses can get started and I go back to my inmate. About 30 minutes later the security informs me that he had died of a PCP overdose and took all my info down. I get investigated for police brutality but no charges filed. Left that job about 4 months ago. My 9-month son was dying of brain cancer and I asked his doctor to take him off life support. I felt guilty but I believe it was the right thing to do. I worked as a bouncer in California for 5 years while I went to college. There were lots of fights and squabbles, but they usually ended with no one getting hurt, with a few exceptions. One in particular was a fellow who ran in, jumped over the bar and started throwing the bottles everywhere. Then he lit a match and threw it on the ground. Fire didn't spread or do anything because it missed the alcohol, but I was grabbing him and hauling him back over the bar to restrain him while they called the cops. He slashed me across my neck, clavicle, and chest with a switchblade, and when I grabbed his arms to protect my face he still cut my face 6 more times. 96 stitches. I was on my own. Just some kids in the bar and a female bartender, so I just pushed his knife back into his throat while he kept trying to slash at my face, snapping his wrist in half in the process. I wasn't even trying to kill or do any of that. I was just scared shitless I was going to die defending a bar. Even worse was while I was trying to stop his bleeding he was still swinging at me. He was definitely on some uppers. My guilt is that even though I was bigger and more experienced, I wasn't able to just solve the problem without any serious injuries. So I killed somebody, with 9 witnesses, cameras, and 1 phone video. There was nothing criminal, but I can't touch someone's arms or hands without feeling like I'll snap their wrist in half backwards. It was sickening. Of course I quit the next day. He was the ex-boyfriend of another bartender who wasn't even there that day. I think he might have killed the bartender that was there though, so I'm glad I was there. I own a diesel performance shop and many nights stay up there till midnight. I'll leave my office doors open if the weather feels nice. There is a bar next to my shop, so I am used to people walking through my parking lot or by my office and never think about it. This night it was a Friday and a guy stumbles up to my door mumbling. I can't understand him, so I walk over and ask him if he is okay. He then straightened up and pulls a knife and slashed my face. Told me he knew today I paid all my guys in cash and to give him what was left. I told him I only withdraw the exact amount for payroll, and he tells me something he'll never forget. Get me money or your mama gonna be going to a funeral this week. I said okay, reached in my desk and pulled out a 380 a customer sold me the week before and shot twice. First one hit his stomach, second his leg. I was trying to be non-fatal, but as it turns out apparently most shots in the leg are because of a major artery. I tied off his leg while waiting for the police. He was dead before they got there. I don't regret it. It turned out he was on M, so who knows how it would have gone for me. I also sincerely believe if you threaten someone's life you forfeit your own. Sad thing is his parents are customers of mine. I went to the funeral. They told me they don't blame me and they still bring their trucks to me, and it's really only when I see them it comes up. When I was 14, I was walking home after chilling with my friends for a while. It was about 8 o'clock and the walk was only supposed to take me 15 minutes because I take a lot of back alleys and shortcuts. I never thought of my town as an unsafe place. Not much crime happens, yet I always carry around a pocket knife, because you never know when you need it, not just for defense either. However, as I was walking, I noticed a guy standing up against a wall in one of the alleys. I paid no mind to him, but that was my mistake. As I passed him, he tried to grab me. He wrapped an arm around my neck and cupped his hand over my mouth, and the other around my waist to carry me off. At that point, I instinctively grabbed my knife from my belt loop, flicked it open and just jabbed where my arm could reach. Turns out I stabbed the guy through his throat, severing his jugular and his larynx. After that he threw me down and I ended up hitting my head on a dumpster, which knocked me cold. However, all I heard before I was out was the guy trying to scream for help, but the sounds were just horrifying. Next thing I remember, I was in the hospital with a serious concussion and a bunch of cops. Apparently there was a shop a little down from where we were, and the owner taking out the trash noticed us somehow. One of his cameras must have caught everything because after they asked my story they didn't press charges or anything. 2012. I had been doing security for about 5 months. I worked at a shithole apartment complex, which was an unarmed property, but after 2 drive-bys, I requested from the property management and my company to allow me to carry while I was there. I had my armed guard card, so it was legal. 3 days after I got permission to carry, I had some domestic abuse issues going on and had cops on scene. After everyone cleared out, I went back to my patrols. I was standing at an apartment building on the edge of the street. While I had my head down writing out my report, I felt a sharp pain in my back. I stood straight up and next thing I know someone has their arm around my neck in a headlock. He managed to get another stab into my stomach just under my vest. I grabbed for my firearm, pushed up in an attempt to break the hold, which was ineffective. I could feel him trying to stab, but only meeting my vest. I put my gun to the bottom of his head and pulled the trigger. His let go of his grip, and I turned around. His face was completely fricked. The angle of the gun made the bullet come out of his nose region. His jaw was flash burned to absolute crap and just hanging like a zombie. I put 2 more into his chest when he finally fell. PCP is one heck of a drug, kids. One of the reporting officers for the domestic abuse was parked up the street. He saw the whole thing, but didn't have time to warn me because he said the druggie was running towards me, and since I was near a busy street, I couldn't hear him coming. I was not guilty. The guy had 2 warrants and a long list of previous criminal history from assault to grand theft auto. I haven't really thought about it since it happened. A guy had taken serious issue with me earlier that year, 2010, over hooking up with his ex-girlfriend and then dating her after. Some threatening Facebook messages was the only real interaction I had with him up until the night it happened. Fast forward a few months, I was at a bar with friends. He keeps trying to start problems outside when we were smoking. I keep backing away, telling him repeatedly that I don't want to fight you. He swings and hits me and my reaction was to punch him in the throat. and I really don't know why. I guess the face just seemed like it would break my hand as I had never actually punched somebody before. Well, he fell back and hit his head on a curb and died later in hospital from the head injury. Police never laid charges as there was a camera on the parking lot. He was clearly the aggressor. I feel bad he died. Wish he didn't, but I just kind of tell myself that he did it to himself. Just very unfortunate it happened the way it did. I don't think it's what you are looking for, but I decided when it was time to take my father off life support. Yes, it's bad. Please make sure you understand your parents' wishes ahead of time. It will help you when it's your turn. It haunts me to today, but here goes. This was last year in April. I was driving my aunt for some last minute shopping before she left for the UK the next day. Traffic in Kenya is pure chaos. Basically every man for himself. Anyways, I'm driving at about 50 kph. Suddenly I see a homeless guy jump into oncoming traffic trying to cross the road. I guess he miscalculated the speed of the oncoming bus because he was hit and sent flying right onto my lane. He lands about 2 feet from the car, and at the speed I was doing it was too late to stop. Long story short, there's a very sickening sound the head makes as it explodes under pressure. I'm not sure if the impact from the bus killed him, but I sure as heck finished him off. It crosses my mind every time I get into the driver's seat. Had a woman walk in front of my truck as I was driving. Later found out her intent was committing suicide. She got her wish, but I was left with earth-shattering PTSD. Changed my whole life. Happened when I was 16. I was part of a church retreat, and some of the kids my age were all playing dodgeball together. I was the last member on my team left on my field, and my friend was the last on his side. I was really good at dodging, but I throw like a sissy unfortunately. But my friend was overall very athletic, and in dodgeball he was often referred to as face killer for obvious reasons. He took aim and threw the ball as hard as he could, and I ran my hardest to dodge, and all of a sudden I trip over something and go flying across the field. After trying to figure out what happened, all I heard was just a really loud crying. I looked back to where I was, and there was a 6-year-old kid who had happened to wander onto the field while I wasn't looking and decided to take a seat on the floor. When I tripped over him, he had hit his head really hard on the hardwood. He didn't stop crying, so he was taken to the hospital. Our chaperones told us not to worry and that things will be okay. My friend joked that I had killed him. Apparently the kid happened to have had a physical defect on the side of his head where the veins normally are. It was all thinner than normal and in a tangled mess, and from the impact it ruptured the veins and the doctors weren't able to stop the bleeding in his head. 3 days later the child had passed away. I blamed myself for being the cause of his death for a long time. Knowing I had innocent blood on my hands were one of the biggest contributors for my depression. But I never told anyone how I felt, cause no one ever came to blame me, not even the boy's family. I just tried to self-punish myself somehow to justify it. Shared this before, but I was walking to 7/11 in the middle of the day on a weekday and took a shortcut across an empty lot in Austin, TX. A guy jumped out from behind some vegetation and I saw him out of the corner of my eye as he was mid-jump. He tackled me and was on top of me and hit me a few times, and I pulled out my knife and cut from about his chin to his ear. He never said anything, never asked for anything, just jumped on top of me and started hitting. He ran off and bled too much before he made it to the hospital. Was a medic in Afghanistan. One of my friends was injured on a patrol. He ended up losing everything below his belly button. I packed all his wounds the best I could. I knew he wouldn't last long, and then he starts begging for me to kill him. We were 8 months into our deployment, and by then we had already talked contingency plans, and I promised him I would. I gave him a lot of ketamine. Like a lot. He passed away high as a kite, just like he wanted. At his funeral I cried my eyes out. Maybe he could have lived, but I'll never know. That was 4 years ago. I've dealt with depression, anxiety, nightmares, and have tried to commit suicide 4 times since. I miss him a lot, and his mom is so nice. I live 30 minutes from her and try to visit twice a month. She calls me Doc. Nothing exciting, but gave order to withdraw life support twice in 4 years so far. I'm still young, but attendings say it gets easier. I just don't know. I was the chief pilot for the owners of a large company in Florida. I was flying long hours because one of the other pilots took vacation because his wife was having a baby. At the last stop, I rented a car from the FBO and stopped for some dinner with my coworker. After leaving the restaurant, my rental car's door was open, though I had locked it before entering the restaurant. I ran up to see what was going on and there was a man going through my luggage in the back seat. The very first thing I said was that I was calling the cops. This caught him off guard because he didn't know I was there. He leaped out of the car and said if I pulled out my phone, he would kill me. All the while he was pulling out a .38 special and held it down, waiting for me to react. The customers on the patio had noticed what was going on and called the police without either of our knowledge. We both stood in silence as we both realized we were in a fricked situation. He said give me the keys. I refused, and he started to move his arm. Before he could even lift his arm all the way to aim at me, I managed to remove my Springfield XD9 from my rubber holster tucked into my slacks and fired 3 shots, all center mass. He fell back and I took cover behind the car, pulling my co-worker who had watched the whole thing unfold. The officers arrived about 4 minutes later and detained me while they investigated. The man died 3 minutes after the police arrived. A man took cell phone video from the patio and it was used in the case. I was 26. This was last year. It haunts me to this day and I will never forget it. I was cleared about 6 hours later and returned home following the incident. Few years ago I was walking home at night after a pub shift and decided to cut down an alleyway to save some time. It was freezing that night and I just wanted to be warm. When I got jumped by 2 guys, I got hit in the back of the head by a bit of wood and went straight down. Come to feel one of the guys trying to pull my skirt and tights off. I tried fighting but seeing as he was a lot bigger than me, I really struggled. I grabbed around and grabbed a beer bottle and smashed it in his face. Long story short, he bled out and died. His friend ran off and left him. Someone called the police, found me crying, him dead. I was arrested, questioned, soon become very apparent what happened. I wasn't never charged, all in self-defense. They never found the second guy, and to this day still think about the guy who I killed. I'm a respiratory therapist, so when someone says take them off life support or pulling the plug, they are typically talking about me. For a bit the oddness really struck a nerve. Families and even patients thanking me. I stopped counting at 27 in my first 8 months. I've done everyone, from babies to the elderly. It actually hit home last night. I was watching Scrubs, the episode where Laverne dies, and they have to go in to say goodbye. And I've said goodbye to so many people. I work in home care now, partially because of it. You've been visited by a dog. It's a regular dog but he's a good boy. If you comment pet he'll let you pet him. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video. Or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.